Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Dr. Maggie Kang. I'm a mom caregiver to my daughter Nell Choi, who lives with NMOSD. I am honored to welcome you to this very special panel on the lived experience of NMOSD and MOGAD, and very grateful to the Samira Foundation for hosting this event. And also, we are going to now shift the spotlight from medical terminology and diagnoses and the scientific aspects of these diseases to the human side, the resilient and raw and remarkable stories of living with these diagnoses. We're joined here by a courageous group of panelists who are here to share their stories, not just of the pain and challenges, but of hope and strength. Let's get started. With brief introductions, Brian?
Hello, I'm Brian Dawson. I live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I've been an ambassador for the Samira Foundation since, I think, 2021. I was originally diagnosed with NMOSD and then re-diagnosed with MOGAD.
Hello, I'm Unica. I'm from the Washington, D.C. area. I have been living with NMOSD since February 2020.
Hello, my name is Star Greaser. I live here in Washington, D.C., and I was diagnosed with MOGAD last year in March of last year.
Hello, my name is Ilona Williams. I live in Alexandria, Virginia, and I was diagnosed with NMOSD in 2018.
Hi everyone, my name is Nell Choi. I am a junior ambassador to the Samira Foundation. I was diagnosed with NMOSD when I was 9, and I am also from the DC area.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here again. There are so many people who have started on their NMOSD and MOGAD journeys attending this conference, and it would be so wonderful if each of you could share what that was like at the time that you were diagnosed, some of the emotions you'd experienced, and we could start on this side.
Yeah, so I remember the day that, okay, this is like so long ago, and even trying to think about remembering is kind of crazy, but I remember the day my mom took me to the emergency room after several weeks of nausea, vomiting, hiccups, kind of persistent, which we all thought was the flu. And then I was pretty knocked out by then, but honestly, hearing what my mom shared with me later on about, as a radiologist, seeing my brain MRI scans and just how scary that was for my family, it was a pretty scary time and a lot of confusion, and I'm just so grateful that I had the support that I did.
I know, like Nell says, it seems like so long ago, but 2018, I guess, wasn't as far as it wasn't that far. But when I was in the hospital, same thing. I was I don't remember the initial time frame of when I went in. I was kind of in a semi-comatose state. I was just in and out. I was fearful. I mean, I was afraid. I didn't know what was happening to me. All I kept hearing was that they were speculating that what I was fighting was fairly new and it was still being learned about. And so there was a lot of discussion about treatments and that kind of thing. And I just felt, I was, like I explained, I felt like I had a rainbow of emotions. I had fear, I was angry, I didn't understand what was happening, why it was happening. I mean, I felt like I had always lived my life fairly healthy, and I was active. I mean, and all of a sudden, all this stuff was gone. You know, I was no longer able, there was a certain point where I wasn't able to speak, read, or write. I had to have a Foley catheter bag. I was not mobile. And I'm like, my life just changed in an instant. And like I said, it made me angry, but it was motivation for me because I was like, I'm not going to let this stop me. Whatever this is, I'm not going to let it get me down. And from that point on, it was just perseverance.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I mean, both of you guys speak about how life seemed normal, and then all of a sudden you wake up and you have this disease and these symptoms and these diagnoses and what to do about it. I can understand the frustration, the anger, and the grief, of course, that comes with that. Star?
And I mean, really, you hit the nail on the head with that. It was so sudden. I remember it was 15 months ago, so it's still new for me. So I'm able to remember it quite well. But, you know, I woke up with my eyes just, you know, I could move them, but they were swelling, and it felt like a lot of work to move them. It was very laborious. Every time I moved them, it hurt so much. And, you know, being an American, I have that medical trauma, you know, that of having that medical industrial, really a lot of trauma from that. And so I used Dr. Google. You know, maybe it was a sinus infection. I thought maybe I actually had a hangover because just the night before I went out to dinner and I had a new type of wine that I never had before. So I thought maybe I'm just hungover, but I thought, oh, that's not that. I thought, oh, okay, it's dry eye. I took some over-the-counter medicine and it just kept going. And so it was just over a week of me just going through the pain and not being able to, you know, move my eyes. And again, I use sign language, and so I use my eyes, you know, to track, and then it just became so hard. And, you know, I woke up one morning, and I remember waking up, and it felt like just flashing lights, little speckles all around my vision, and it was bad. So I called an ophthalmologist. You know, I figured out who my insurance covered, and, you know, it was the first place I found that accepted my insurance. I've had an appointment. I explained to them what was happening, and they said, you know, you need to come in, but the first available appointment was that Monday. So I had that appointment. They did testing, and you know, when you put your eye in the little stirrups, and they tested everything, and they wrote a letter, and all the letter said, go to the ER. They said, do not stop at home, do not pass go, do not collect $200, go straight to the ER. So I said, okay. So I stopped home, you know, and I had to get my cell phone charger, of course. And then I went to the ER and I gave them that piece of paper. Of course, it was that, you know, long line for triaging the patients. I had that letter and the waiting time, you know, again, it was like trying to get into the movie. It's a nice long line. And I said, okay. They said, you're going in next when I gave that piece of paper. And I thought, oh, man. And so it was that immediate. I went in and they started all the testing. And so it was truly frightening. And, you know, my eyes started to get that tunnel vision and everything got really dark. And I thought, what is this? You know, is it my brain? What is causing this? So they went in immediately doing all the MRIs, testing everything, one thing after another, and my fear is just growing. So it was honestly terrifying. And I was really fortunate, you know, that my journey to diagnosis was very quick. And again, being here in DC, going to MedStar Hospital. Of course, this is Georgetown, but Washington Hospital Center is the other major medical facility. And right away, I was able to connect with the people who knew what tests I needed immediately. And Dr. Osborne was actually the first doctor I connected with. So again, right away, I got that diagnosis from there. So I was very fortunate, you know, in that way. But it was just terrifying, not knowing what was going on. Again, getting that piece of paper that says, go to the ER, then I got the diagnosis that said I have MOGAD, and I mean, it all just went from there, so.
Wow, what a story. And you were diagnosed with just 15 months ago, you said? And here you are today. Incredible. And I would imagine that having visual changes for just about anybody is so terrifying, but that in addition to being hearing impaired, I can only imagine how amplified that terror was for you.
Yes, I am deaf, and you're right, because it cuts off my access to communication. You know, my world is a very visual world. It's visual language. And then to add on that, you know, I don't want to take away from the other panelists, but, you know, in the hospital, you know, again, I really want to emphasize that I was so fortunate to be here in DC, because when I look at folks, other hospitals in other cities, you don't have access to interpreters. They don't have access for any sort of communication ready for deaf folks. And so I was so fortunate when I got there, there was a team ready. I had an interpreter with me the whole way. The doctors were trained on how to use interpreters, and that was crucial. And, without that, it could have been a different story. I could have had a misdiagnosis for years and years and years. If I didn't have my right access, if I didn't have access to communication, it could have been a different story very easily. Even if I was just 20 miles from here, but I just happened to be here, and I was so fortunate when it came to that.
I am so happy to hear that you got the care that you needed. And just to clarify, as we're going through the panel, Nell was diagnosed in 2018, and when was your diagnosis? Okay, similar time frame, and then we're at a 15-month.
2024, yes.
Got you. Okay, because I know everybody here is at a different point in their journey in the diagnosis, and just sort of give you a time frame. Okay, so Unica.
I feel like my pathway to diagnosis is very similar to Star's.
Take your time.
And it was funny too. I started experiencing some blindness in my left eye, and it was kind of gradual, kind of like peripheral, kind of just slipping away a little bit. So I think it was probably about 2 or 3 days later, I ended up making an emergency appointment with an ophthalmologist, and I told my supervisor, hey, I gotta leave work right now. I can't see you. Literally. Complete vision gone in the left eye, and it was working on the right one. Go to the ophthalmologist. They're like, okay, not really sure what you got here, ma'am, so we're going to send you to an ophthalmologist. Okay. Drive all the way to the ophthalmologist. Almost verbatim, same words as Star. Emergency room, like yesterday. Like, you came in here with no vision in one eye. Emergency room, right here, right now. Ironically, like I said, I got diagnosed in February 2020. So everybody knows where we were as a world in February 2020.
Oh, right before COVID.
Yes. I also was dealing with a dual diagnosis, was diagnosed with diabetes as well, so I was hospitalized for about a week and a half. And like day 2 of me being hospitalized, that's when everything shut down. The whole world was like, nobody's moving anywhere. Mask up, eyes closed, everybody keep your heads down because we don't know what's going on. So kind of navigating all of those things at the same time really kind of stacked up those big feelings that I was having at the time. There's definitely fear, there was uncertainty, like Star mentioned, we go to Google University first. Dr. Google says if you got a paper cut, you're dying. All of the things, and trying to figure out, what is this that I'm navigating? I've never heard of it. I kind of heard of MS and heard of some of the overlapping like symptoms and how it presents. But when those words kind of were introduced to me, I was diagnosed after I was discharged from the hospital. I was seeing a neurologist, and he had some questions, but he kind of knew what was going on, and he knew that wasn't really his expertise, so he actually referred me to Dr. Shin, who was super amazing, kind of being very knowledgeable in this space. Like, I didn't feel like I was talking to someone who didn't know anything about this super rare disease. Like, he was very knowledgeable. I answered all of the questions that I had and started treatment immediately. There were no kind of, gaps in the process. It was just, we know what this is. We understand it. Let's get you some help.
Thank you.
Okay. Listening to their stories, you can see the threads and the similarities to the point that people up here probably heard my alarm going off, and that's my heart rate alarm. Because listening to their stories, even though I was diagnosed 10 years ago now, I'm having a physiological reaction to being able to identify with everyone up here. And that's just kind of it's just part of the journey. So for me, I had just started a new job. Life was fantastic. I had a cold, no big deal. I had gone to a clinic a couple times, changing medications. And then finally, after about 2 weeks, I woke up and my vision was really bad, crushing headache, severe abdominal pain. I told my wife, it's time to go to the emergency room. So I got there at about 5:30. By about 10:30, I was completely blind in my left eye, paralyzed from the chest down. Teams, different services had come in to evaluate me. Nobody knew what to do. No one quite knew who should take responsibility. Long story short, I was finally admitted, and about 2 weeks later, a fellow from the neurology unit or neurology team came in. He said, "We figured it out." He was proud as could be. He just solved the puzzle. Like, you know, it was like watching the episode of House where they, you know, the light bulb moment, like that was him. And he's leaning up against the wall. His arms are all crossed. And he's like, "You have NMO." All right, what's that? So he explained what it was. He said, "It's like MS." Okay, my mother has MS, so I have an idea. What's the prognosis? I said, well, probably about 5 years you're going to be blind, and then probably within the next 2 years, you'll get a lesion high in your brainstem. You'll be on a ventilator, and then, you know, that's usually it. Oh my God. So then he says, "All right, I'll be back with the rest of the team," and left. So about 6 o'clock in the morning, that's the news that I have. Fortunately, I had phenomenal nurses who came in, you know, kind of did some mental first aid for me, and another one chewed him out in the hallway for being a jerk. And the next 2 years was just a cycle of being on steroids and kind of like relapses, and finally I ended up at Johns Hopkins. And the team there looked at me and said, "You have MOGAD. That's what's going on." They confirmed it in a test. Okay, prognosis. And I prepared myself, and they looked at me and said, "You're going to grow old, and it's going to be heart disease or diabetes, one of the things that gets everybody. It's like, you're going to have a full life." And so I went from living, hearing that clock ticking in the back of my head at all times, to being like, holy crap, now what? Like, I have to start planning a life again, because my focus had become very small, and now my world opened up again. And so that was my story of diagnosis.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I feel like based on all these stories, the experience is so varied. I mean, and one of the things that I'm finding hope in is that, you know, Unica and Star, who've been diagnosed fairly recently, had a much shorter journey to diagnosis, and I'm hoping to see that trend more and more as we all gather here and talk and create awareness on this. But I do really like how you talked about how your world closed and then it opened up. And so I really want to kind of move to talk about how that transition, or when that transition occurred for you, what that looked like. Was it sort of a realization one day, or was it slow, or how did you sort of, yes, transition from the shock and the grief and the anger of the initial diagnosis and the frustration of the diagnostic journey to where you are now?
It was never linear. You know, there are days I wake up and, you know, I guess I'm bitter. You know, it's like, God, got to deal with this again today. And there are other days, like this morning, I woke up and I was like, all right, I'm going to go tell my story. People are going to hear what we go through as a community, and hopefully they're going to take something away and being able to implement change, whether that's in research, whether that's in policy, whether that's just in general advocacy. And for me, it was really, I think, after my MOGAD diagnosis that I was like, this, with the resources we have in the world today, nobody should go through that process that I went through. And that's how I ended up, you know, talking to Samira through a Facebook group. And I came into the community and I started to have a voice. And since that point, you know, I've done a couple patient days. I've got involved with the State Rare Disease Advisory Council, trying to make impacts there.
Yes, the podcast.
Oh, yeah. I hosted the podcast for 2 seasons, just trying to get the answers out to people and get as many people as possible to understand, like, this diagnosis is not just the end. There's a lot more. And, you know, when I was diagnosed, there, like was mentioned earlier, there were no FDA-approved treatments. There's 3 for NMO. You know, there's more in the pipeline. So I'm looking forward to the day where MOGAD, it's our turn. And we just got an ICD code, like, within the last year, I think. So that was a big victory, you know. Yeah, so it's moving along, and it's just not the end.
Yeah, and I do think you speak to something that we're all familiar with here, is finding your voice. And it is very empowering to sort of share your story as you're doing right now, and to connect with others with similar stories. And as you've done, you've taken that even a step further. You hosted a podcast and you talked to so many people, including myself as a caregiver, in sharing our stories. And that is so empowering. And I think coming together at this event is also part of that. And I wonder if, Nell, could you speak to that?
Yeah, just, I guess, kind of answer your initial question. I feel like as a kid, I'm sure everyone remembers being a kid, but I think the main thing I wanted to feel is like I belonged and that I fit in. And so I think initially it was really hard, I guess, to accept the fact that I was no longer the same active, healthy kid that I was before I got sick. I used to play travel lacrosse, and so a lot of my friendships were based around, my teammates or things like that. So after I got sick and I was recovering and doing rehab, I tried so hard to go back to my quote unquote old life. And it wasn't until after several tries of just like trying to stay on the team and feeling super like getting really bad heat exhaustion, trying to go to tournaments and never feeling like I could actually keep up. It was that realization of being like, okay, maybe it's time to turn and pivot to something else. And I think once I was able to let go of the fact that I was no longer the same person I was before, that's when the opportunities started to arise for me, like joining the Sue Meyer Foundation and finding a love for art and writing and all these other, and meeting all these amazing people like you all here today. I think these are some of those gifts that I know Sue Meyer alluded to earlier this morning. So.
Thank you. And I'm just going to put in a plug for Nell in terms of voice and sharing story and writing. She actually did write and publish a book about her experience. So if you want to know more about it, it's on Amazon. It's called My Hospital Story, or she has some here. So come find us afterwards. And Alona, was there at some point sort of a turning point or a transition experience that you could share? Because the person that you are today is clearly very different from the person that you were at the time of diagnosis. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that, just to sort of illuminate the path forward for a lot of patients who might be newly diagnosed.
My life now definitely is much different. I kind of started at a different pace or path because I had been misdiagnosed with, or I was diagnosed with MS, and I had undergone almost 3 to 4 years of MS treatments. And it wasn't and then it was after that point that I kind of had like a relapse, and I ended up in the hospital. And even the neurologist that was handling or taking care of me at that time didn't know what was happening, because my mom actually reached out to him and she explained what was going on with me. And he said, I don't know. He goes, I've never seen her like that. I don't know what's going on. You need to take her to the ER. And so that's where my NMOSD journey kind of started. So I went to the ER. I was admitted because, again, I was admitted with them thinking I was having an MS issue or relapse or something. And during that time is when I was admitted, and that's when the hospital neurologist was kind of like, yeah, I don't think they were trying to do different treatments with me, and they were like, she's not really responding to anything. We don't think this is MS. But I have a fellow that specializes in different form of MS. My mom was, and again, in that time I was kind of in a semi-comatose state, so I honestly did not remember or know anything that was going on. And so he then reached out to Dr. Shin, who became my neurologist and who then took care of my treatments and diagnosed me with NMOSD. And when I came to, and I still didn't fully understand what was happening to me. And I was scared because prior to me being hospitalized, I was working full time. I worked at a law firm. I traveled internationally and globally. And I exercised. I had my girls' weekends. I had all these things that I was, looking forward to and planning. And then all of a sudden, it all just came to a halt. And again, I didn't understand what's happening to me. And even Dr. Shin, it was so funny because once I was out of the hospital and I kind of came to and everything, the first time I saw him in person, he asked me, he said, "Do you know who I am?" And I said, "I recognize your voice, but I don't know who you are." And he's like, "Well, I'm your neurologist, And I was like, "Oh, well, happy to have you, because I need one." And from there on, he really took care of me. He was very good. He tried to, he was very compassionate and empathetic. And he said to me, the best thing you can do is to try to educate yourself as much as you can. And he shared whatever educational materials that he had regarding NMOSD. And the one thing he did tell me, I remember when I left his office, he said, okay, he handed me all this stuff. He goes, whatever you do, don't Google this. So what did I do, right? I go home and I Google it, and it says I got 5 years to live, and I'm like, holy crap. And I was like, what kind of a neurologist are you? Like, I got 5 years, But he was good. He was always on my back. He was always available to me. And he was really, he really helped, he helped me with my, what am I trying to say here? He helped me with my strength, my confidence, and he was like, you know what? We can do this. And it wasn't yes, he was talking to me and he was referring to me, but his discussions with me was we can, which I knew I had my team. He was my team. He and I were a team. And then my mom also, my caretaker, was brought into it. And so my life changed in the sense that and I used to tell him this too. I hated the term, this is your new life, your new life. And I was just like, my new life? I didn't ask for a new life. Like, I like my old life. Like, I want it back, And so it was like, well, you got to make the best with what you got. So off we went, and I did. I just, I had to relearn. I was paralyzed for a period of time from my chest to my toes. I couldn't stand. I couldn't walk. I couldn't speak. I was on a Foley catheter. And then I had to relearn how to do all that stuff. It was like being a child again. And then being an adult, of course, I'm impatient. I get aggravated. I'm frustrated. But then it came around. It's just it took time. But part of that period was also having a team, and I considered my team to be my neurologist, Dr. Shin, and my mother, my caretaker. And I wouldn't have made it this far without either of them.
Thank you for sharing that. I think so many people can see themselves in your story. And I love how you expressed originally how you felt a rainbow of emotions, because that is so true.
Yeah.
You feel everything from grief and anger all the way to gratitude and hope. And it is an intense emotional experience the whole way through.
Well, I would just want to add, too, the good side of having NMO, or if you want to look at it that way, is like Nell was saying, I had the opportunity to meet a range and a slew of people that in my day-to-day life I probably would have never have met or interacted with. And I'm very grateful because I also gain a lot of strength from those advocacy groups and those people, because like we all have shared, we have something very rare in common.
It's true. Yeah. Thank you. And Star, I know that thankfully your diagnostic journey was not as long and you were relatively recently diagnosed, but I wonder, since the time of your diagnosis to now, sort of curious how your life has changed or how you see things has changed, or perhaps what brought you to this event.
Well, how my life changed. Life changes regardless whether you have an illness or not. Life is a roller coaster, right?
Absolutely.
But again, I consider myself, compared to others, very fortunate within my experience and my journey. Because optic neuritis, when I had that tunnel vision happen, when I was first diagnosed, Dr. Osborne gave me that diagnosis and a brochure. All of this stuff. It's like, oh, MOGAD, welcome to the community. And I thought, what? There's support groups, and I thought, wait, what is this? And, I can admit, that I was a little bit more in denial about this. Yes, I was diagnosed. Yes, I, had my vision blackout. Yes, I was in hospital for a week and getting, that heavy treatment and everything, having the IVs. And I thought, well, I mean, I'm good now. And also, when you talk about the statistics, 50% of people have that optic neuritis one time. And then you're done. You don't have a relapse. So I thought, well, I'm good from here on. But then I had my second attack. And I said, okay. So I went back, had more testing. And again, I was still a little bit in denial. I said, I'm okay. Until I realized that I'm not okay. I'm okay most days until I'm not okay. So every morning I'd wake up and I'd kind of check my eyes, blink a little and say, okay, today's a good day. Life did change, but I had to, when I had different types of flare-ups, I mean, it was a sea of emotions at that point.
Yes.
I was all over the place. And then, I'd settle down a little bit. I'd make sure I was consistent with my regimen, my medication. And that, I realized that the actual optic neuritis was very temporary, but I felt a little bit, again, in denial, I guess, even within my place on this journey. Support groups were really helpful. I actually was on a couple Facebook groups, and then I was on Reddit as well as subreddit. And there's a lot of misinformation there as well. But, still seeing people talk about their experiences. And, again, my experience is quite unique, because it involved a lot of communication access. And I saw one website that had a Zoom support group. Now, for me to join that, it would be even harder because, of course, I have to find an interpreter, someone who would work with me on that. And, those types of support groups are not are not accessible to me. And it's not anyone's fault. I see everyone here is hearing and I'm deaf. But, I need that visual access every time, everywhere I go. I have to think about communication. And so this is my first time meeting a real life individual who had MOGAD. Yeah, this is my first time. I've never experienced actually meeting another individual like me. Of course, Facebook, Reddit, the faces, behind the computer, I never got to meet. So, yeah.
So here you are. Thank you. We're so grateful that you're here. But, I do... Yeah.
Thank you. And, thank you. I mean, again, Dr. Osborne really pushed me. He said, you need to be on this panel. And I thought, oh, okay. And so we reached out to Samara about, me being on the panel. Are you going to have interpreters? And I did have to, explain. There's always a lot of education just because people are not aware of things they've never experienced before. They don't understand it. This happens with most doctors. Almost every doctor, every medical professional here has probably never had a deaf patient. I would bet $100 for each of you that you have never had a deaf patient before. So there's a lot of that education piece, a lot of, when you have those diseases, you have to advocate for yourself as a patient, and you also have to advocate yourself for communication needs. So it's twofold. And so that adds a whole different barrier and responsibility. And you have that dual advocacy, which can be quite exhausting. So I'm just so thankful for y'all working with me, setting up the interpreters. I can't thank you enough for that.
Oh, we're so grateful that you came here and to share your story. Thank you. And I feel like I want to highlight something that you had shared. I think it's this emotion of denial, which I think maybe isn't spoken of as often as it should be, because I know that I experienced this, that when Nell got sick, I really did resist this diagnosis, and I didn't want it to happen. And it took me quite a bit to accept that we had this and that our lives have changed. And that is actually a significant step in the experience of getting a rare disease diagnosis. So thank you for sharing that. Unica, I know you two also have like a relatively recent diagnosis, but I wonder like how your experience has sort of changed your life or your outlook, or again, like, could you just share a little bit on that?
I feel like Star and I are the same person. We seem to share a lot of experiences. I too have. It's weird because I felt like, my journey for the most part has been like unproblematic, right? The initial diagnosis was the optica neuritis, and then like nothing, like. And so sometimes it causes me to be hyper vigilant, right? When things are going on with my body. So I'm paying more attention to my health. Similar to Star, like I'm checking my vision. So my vision has returned for the most part, but my left eye still's, a little weak. I'm getting older, so there's that. But recognizing that, from the initial attack, still experiencing, some impacts on my vision from it. But like similar to what Star said, like every day I'm checking, like, hey, glasses, you still work? What's going on? And then, like as I mentioned earlier, also being diagnosed with diabetes, so some symptoms kind of overlap. Like experiencing an active bladder could be, a symptom that I'm having an NMO attack. It also could be a symptom that my sugar is through the roof. So trying to pay attention to my body more. And just practice better health. It's kind of just been my journey for the last 5 years. And it fluctuates, right? Sometimes I'm feeling great. I feel normal. Nothing's happened. And other times I'm like, wow, kid, like you're navigating something serious that a lot of people don't know or don't understand. Trying to explain it to my family has been an interesting conversation. And they're like, so what's wrong with you? I'm like, first of all, there's nothing wrong with me.
Yes,
let's be clear, friend. There's nothing wrong. However, this is kind of what I'm navigating. So I would say that, again, if there was anything good to come out of it, it's just understanding myself more, right? Understanding the strength and the power that I have to navigate this thing that's so rare, and the support too. My team, previously Dr. Shin, but also Dr. Osborne now, Nurse Tracy and Miss Lisa, awesome people. They've made this the best journey it could be for somebody like me.
Wow, thank you. I love that. And Brian, I know you already sort of incorporated this in your story and how you have come to a place of empowerment using your voice. I wonder if there was anything more you wanted to add to that in terms of your transition.
So looking back, kind of advice that I would give myself back then, I think based on my journey, what I would tell that person then, what I would tell them today is very different than what I would have told them mattered last year. The world's a very different place all of a sudden. A lot of us are trying to find our footing and figure out what the future is going to hold. So my advice would be, and really part of my empowerment was kind of, first of all, was following the science. In rare disease, it's so hard to find good research, and we get so desperate for answers, and sometimes we can be blinded by hope that we go down rabbit holes of disinformation and misinformation. So we really have to focus and rely on peer-reviewed, replicable scientific study to guide us towards getting better and just having a better future. And the second thing would be, we've all talked about community and how important it was. And before, like last year, I would have said, finding someone who's walking down at times a dark journey with you is really important. But now it's really about coming together and sharing that common voice that we have as rare disease patients. And we need to have a seat at the table when it comes to policy, when it comes to research. I'm sure Samar's not surprised to hear me go down this road. But asking our representatives and the decision makers to represent us, it's not a sign of weakness. We're all humans. We have human dignity. We deserve that. And they need to be responsive to that. So it's about coming together, sharing that voice, and making sure that people are listening to us and that we have a seat at that table for the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. You know, I'm hearing so many common themes about the journey. One is voice empowerment, expressed in books as well as a lot of themes of gratitude, caregivers, moms, and many shout outs for our healthcare providers. Dr. Shin and Dr. Osborne is not here, so I think that's amazing. Now, in the remaining 3 or 4 minutes, I wonder if there are any questions for our panelists.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for your courage and coming up here in front of a room of strangers and speaking about, as I said earlier, some of the worst days of your life. My question is for Brian. As we already established, female predominance in NMO is like 9-to-1, and I believe in MOGAD it's about 50-50, 1-to-1. So being that, and I would say in advocacy and community, you see more women show up as opposed to men just by virtue of how differently we operate as genders. But what do you feel are some unmet needs for support and advocacy for men living with NMOSD and MOGAD?
I think it's just a matter of getting them to come forward and kind of come to the table. Again, I'll use that phrase. You know, there's the old, we're men, we're fine, we'll get by, we'll deal with it. So getting people to kind of just come forward and kind of admit weakness, if you will, admit that there are problems and be vulnerable, I think is a challenge. And I think, I know for me personally, to look at me, I'm very lucky in terms of the levels of disability that I remain. I'm usually able to kind of hide them, so they're not real obvious. And I know a lot of people aren't that fortunate. They've had much more severe impacts. So I think sometimes you don't want to appear that you're trying to steal the spotlight. And also, I think, you know, in the last couple of years, we've really seen women become empowered and being able to find their own voice and to say, you know, hey, you know, this system and these structures that are in place are not fair. It's kind of BS, and kind of take control of their own fate. And, you know, people have started to say, you're right, and step back. And so I know for me, you know, when I see other women doing that, I don't want to step on their toes. I don't want to be like that one guy who's like, but what about? It's not what it's about. And so I think sometimes making sure that males, you know, feel welcomed. I don't want to say even welcomed, just to let them know, you know, hey, you're part of this conversation too. You need to be a part of this, and let's talk about some of those things, if that makes sense.
Totally. And then for every panelist, sorry to be a mic hog, what is a piece of advice based on your own experience that you would give a newly diagnosed patient? And I'd love to hear from everyone.
Me too.
Yeah.
Does anyone have an answer right away? I need a minute to think about that.
I would recommend education. I mean, I know when you receive your diagnosis, you're overwhelmed, you're scared, you don't know, you know, when they tell you it's rare and it doesn't happen to everybody and every patient reacts differently, and you think, all right, well, if everybody reacts differently, like, where do I start? Like, you know, what does this mean for me? And the biggest thing for me was, because I didn't know anything and it was overwhelming and it was scary, and I unfortunately did not suffer from any optic neurotics. All mine was physical, my mobility and all that kind of stuff. So I would highly recommend educating yourself, meaning find out what the resources are, you know, what will help you advance and heal and progress, and make yourself number one. I mean, it's I hate to say it, it's selfish. It's all about you at that point, you know?
I would just say, like, this is more geared to what I would have told myself, I guess, but just give yourself a little more grace. Taking things day by day instead of trying to plan out your entire future like I usually try and do. And just, yeah, giving yourself a little bit more patience and being kinder to yourself. Don't, blame your body for everything. And, yeah, just be kind to yourself.
Do you want to say something?
Well, what would I tell a newly diagnosed person? Very similar. Educate yourself as much as possible. Yeah, I mean, you have this disease. It is what it is. So how you respond to that is what makes the whole difference in the world. And so empower yourself, advocate for yourself, because you have to do that, because no one is going to do it for you. You could have the best caregivers, the best doctor in the world, but you have to do the work and advocate and empower yourself with knowledge, with education, with understanding. What does this mean? And then you'll be in a better position moving forward as far as a prognosis. So, and of course, what that looks like is going to be different for every person. And I've seen that here, such the variance in everyone's approach. And again, you have to be your own best advocate.
I mean, I really like how you talk about response. Like when something happens to you, I think somebody on this panel said, I think you actually said change is always happening. This is true. And the thing that we have control of is how we respond. And actually, just quickly, that reminds me of this this woman, Cint Marshall, I believe her name is. She was the first black woman CEO of the Dallas Mavericks, and she wrote this book called You've Been Chosen. And so she's had a lot of trauma in her life, and one is that she's a survivor of stage 3 colon cancer. But the idea was that she was saying that even though things happen to you that are not desirable, you can decide that you've been chosen for that in order to do something with that experience. And what she did was use her voice to empower herself and to empower others. And I do feel like you have all been here to do that. So I thank you. And I want to ask Unika if you wanted to add anything more.
Sure. Well, second, everything that's been said, especially the education piece. Stay off Dr. Google because he's not your friend. And I would say, I think this was mentioned in the earlier panel talking about self-care. I think navigating, any condition, rare, not rare, is very important to make sure that you incorporate self-care in managing your disease. This is something that is new to you, it's something that's unfamiliar, maybe a little frightening, maybe angering. That's when self-care is the most important, right? To regulate you and get you back to a place of peace, of stability, of self. Right, so that would be the thing that I would say is, bring the self-care to the forefront. And also, this is just a part of your identity. It's not who you are.
Yeah, that's true. There's nothing wrong with me, right?
Ain't nothing wrong with me.
That's right. Did you have anything more, Brian? Are we good?
Nope, that's it.
All righty. Thank you guys so much for being here and reminding us of the resilience of the human spirit. Thank you.